Hello, so I am here today to talk to you about the book of Zechariah. What a strange book it is, filled with some complicated things, but we're going to get through it together. Are you ready? Who wrote the book of Zechariah then? Well, it is very likely that Zechariah himself wrote the book. There's a few arguments here and there that you can find that people think that the book is split up into two sections or maybe more that were written by more than one person. But actually, mainly we're looking at Zechariah the prophet himself. He was a guy who, as a child, was walking with his grandfather as they exited Babylon and returned to Jerusalem. He was a prophet that worked alongside Haggai, as you probably heard if you've watched any more of this series, and you've heard Pastor Wes talk about. They are also mentioned together, Zechariah and Haggai, in the book of Ezra as well. We find them in Jerusalem after they've returned from Babylon and the exile, something I am sure you're familiar with if you've been watching this series. And together they are encouraging the people and sort of managing the rebuilding of the temple. The 70 years from Jeremiah's prophecy of exile was nearly up. So here we find an expectant people, because Jeremiah also prophesied that after those 70 years there will be a rule of a Messiah and God will restore his presence to a new temple. So there's some excitement and expectation in the air, which leads us on to the purpose of this book. The book is a bringer of hope. It was written to point the people to the fact that God had remembered his promises to them and kept them, and it also reinstates the visions and the prophecies of that coming Messiah. Some say you could almost see this book like a miniature version of the book of Isaiah, because it does some similar things within its pages. So what's the book full of then? What actually happens? And there's some complicated things in here, but we're going to make it nice and easy and simple so we can all understand what's going on. We start with an introduction, which is chapter 1, verses 1 to 6. And here, Zechariah is urging the generation, his own generation, to turn back to God. Don't do what your ancestors did, because, we've just come from exile because of their actions, so let's not do that again. And then from chapter 1 verse 7 all the way through to the end of chapter 6, we have Zechariah's 8 main visions through dreams. Now, if you think about some strange images that you might have had in your own dreams, Zechariah's probably trumps it. We've got 8 visions, and some of these visions depict what has come before and show that God was faithful, and some point to the future, a bit like what I said earlier. God says that the 70 years are almost over, which obviously resonates with what Jeremiah said, and it will be time for the Messianic kingdom, but God doesn't put a time limit on it, which is really interesting, isn't it? Some of the visions talk about how the Messianic kingdom will only come if this generation, Zechariah's generation, obey God, which is what Zechariah tells those people in chapters 7 and 8, and that's what they're full of. And then we conclude with 2 other sections, chapter 9 to 11 and chapter 12 to 14, and these are jam-packed full of images and smaller visions about the Messiah. This is the exciting bit. No Old Testament minor prophet has more visions and prophecies of Christ than Zechariah. How cool is that? These chapters talk about things like the humble Messiah, riding on a donkey, which I'm sure is imagery that you know about from the New Testament, and also him being rejected by the religious leaders as well. We have God pouring out his Spirit in these chapters, and the new city will be like a new Garden of Eden, it said, and with a river flowing from the temple, a river of life to all creation. It is some really great stuff and well worth a read. And amongst all of these difficult visions in the first few chapters, there's this great conclusion about all that is to come and some things that we sort of know about as well. And I want to stay with that for my key verse, because my key verse is chapter 13 and verse number 1. And it says this: "On that day, a fountain will be opened to the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to cleanse them from their sin and impurity." And this is the part of the book now we know is talking about Jesus' death on the cross, don't we? And all around this verse we see images of what Jesus is going to do in his life. And I just had a simple thought about this, and it's a thank you thought. It's a thank you, Jesus. Firstly, that I'm in a generation, and you're in a generation, that came after what he did, so that we can have some understanding of what these visions and prophecies mean. We have an understanding, don't we, that maybe those past generations didn't have. And then also a thank you, Jesus, for what you have done for me. Reading these Old Testament books and the minor prophets, I think, really helps put into perspective what Jesus did. We are cleansed from sin and impurity because of this humble king. What should we take away from this book? What is the so what of this book? Well, we're in the middle of Zechariah's prophecies right now, me and you. He also talks about Jesus' second coming as well. So you know, we are more like these people in Jerusalem than you might think. We are also waiting for a prophecy and a promise to be fulfilled. We're in the gap, just like they were. And from that and from this book, we should take away some expectancy and some hope and some excitement that the story isn't actually over yet. Let's not get complacent. Don't get bored with our faith. The visions of Jesus coming again are complicated and we don't quite understand them. And I'm sure that's how they felt about Jesus coming the first time and their Messiah. We're in the middle of exciting days and of God's plan still working, that same plan that those people heard about all those years ago. And that is the book of Zechariah.